Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Stephen Lewis with Metaphysical Media. I hope you've had a good week. This week, we are going to be talking about a very special person, the leader of the free world, the President of the United States, President Barack Obama. He'll be celebrating a birthday on the 4th of August. He's a Leo. And in this episode, we'll be using the technique of the solar return in order to forecast the year ahead for our president. But before we get to that, let's just sort of recap some of the bigger, or I guess more compelling news items. And by the way, Stephen Frampton is trying to get with us tonight. He's having some internet problems out there in Tennessee. So we're all sending you good vibes, Steve, hoping you can make it to join us in this birthday celebration for the president. But first, I'm going to do something that's really rude and crass in America, something that polite people never do, and you should never do this. What I'm about to do is I'm going to show my age. In the 80s, there was this series of commercials for Burger King. Where's the beef? Y'all remember that? The idea being that other fast food restaurants had less beef content in their desiccated little hockey pucks that they sold, whereas Burger King they sold burgers that were succulent and fairly bursting with bovine hormones. Fine. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu's been going around saying, where are the missiles? And America, at least the United States Senate, said, they're right here, BB, no problem. The United States has nudged America that much closer to providing Israel with $250 million to fund their Iron Dome defense system with artillery shells, with missiles, rather. So this is a very interesting quandary for America because Israel, as everyone knows by now, is in the center of a terrible controversy regarding their inhumane treatment of civilians in Gaza. Other news, Ukraine is really surprising everyone with what a party pooper it's being lately. Further complicating the issue, of course, we have the terrible plane crash of MH17. Still, obviously, waiting for that mystery to unravel itself. And because of the delicate politics on the ground, it doesn't look like we'll get any definitive answers anytime soon. Oh, Putin and President Barack Obama have definitely been, I don't want to say talking, but they've been on the phone, let's just say that. And it certainly wasn't, Putin wasn't trying to wish Obama a happy birthday. The topic, of course, was Russian sanctions. That is always the big topic. Of course, if Vladimir Putin could have access to President Obama's birth figure, then he might have some answers to much pondered questions. So let's look at that figure. The birth chart that I'm using for President Barack Obama has a rectified birth time of 7:54:28 p.m. Birthplace, of course, is Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm certainly not one of these who thinks that the president doesn't have a birth certificate or isn't an American or any of that sort of baloney. We have a birth record for the president, and he has an interesting chart, which makes sense because he's an interesting person. So, where to begin with any birth figure? Well, I said we were going to look at his solar return for 2014, and we will. But before we can evaluate the solar return, we have to understand his natal figure. This is a basic rule in all astrological forecasting. How can you know what to forecast and when to forecast it for if you don't know what the chart is even promising in the first place? So, the president has 27 degrees of Aquarius rising, an ascendant at 27 degrees Aquarius. Air rising, the president was born at night. This is a nocturnal figure. And also it's provincial, which means that the president was born after a full moon. The moon is waning in his chart. And this is very interesting. Coming from the ancient tradition, we have it that those natives with waning moons in their chart are late bloomers, according to astrologer Robert Zoller, whereas those with the opposite configuration, where the moon is waxing and becoming full, these charts are called conjunctional, and they're early bloomers. Interestingly enough, the president is a late bloomer with a provincial chart, i.e. being born after a full moon. So we'd expect him to come into his own, as it were, to fully maximize his natal promise after middle age. And it's fair to say that the achievement of the presidency satisfies that condition. Now, looking at anyone's ascendant, you want to look at this. You want to note the quality of the ascendant ruler. This is going to be paramount. And with the rising sign Aquarius, Saturn will be the ruler of Barack Obama's ascendant. Now, this is quite interesting. I'm usually not the conspiracy theory sort of fellow. However, President Obama's 12th house Saturn in Capricorn is quite an intriguing symbol. Quite an intriguing symbol. And we'll talk about this later when we look into solar return. But just sort of analyzing it very simply, very superficially, first of all, what does Saturn in Capricorn mean? Well, in most signs, Saturn's going to perhaps be more problematic, but in the sign that he rules, Capricorn, his expression will be easier. Now, rejection and denial, that's one major keyword of Saturn, I suppose you could say, rejection and denial. And Capricorn, well, what's that? Authority, status, wealth. These three things are very Capricornian, very much associated with Capricorn. So Saturn in Capricorn, we could see that as a rejection of status, a rejection of wealth, a rejection of structure. And indeed, so it's been. This is the side of the president that Benjamin Netanyahu sees when he tries to extract promises for increased American commitments to Israeli military ventures. The rejection of status. Israel and America have Israel has a certain diplomatic status with America. Indeed, it receives benefits out of proportion to its size and it's out of proportion to its geopolitical footprint and its influence, as it were. So, Saturn is in 25 degrees of Capricorn. Now, Saturn also represents engineering, and here's where things get a little spooky, for lack of a better word. Saturn represents engineering, and in Capricorn, which we already said represented structure, authority, wealth, then we see that Saturn is engineering these things. He's engineering authority. He's engineering wealth. But he's in the 12th house. He's doing this in secret. This is a very interesting thing about President Barack Obama. His 12th house, secret Saturn in Capricorn. As the show progresses, you'll see that I have theories that the president's chart has many, many testimonies of being other-directed, do you see? In many ways, our president, as any other president, is subject to forces, I don't want to say greater than himself, because these are collective forces, such as his constituency, such as campaign donors, and things of that sort. But we'll get to that in a bit. Let's focus in more on the ascendant. There's a planet there, and anytime you have a planet in a house, it will rule the affairs. It will dominate the affairs of that house, even more so than the houses that it itself rules. Okay, so the planet in question is Jupiter. We have Jupiter in 0 degrees, 51 minutes Aquarius in the first house. Very, very strong symbol of a lawyer and a legal figure. Jupiter, of course, is a blatant emblem for the law and for lawyers and judges and things of that sort, Congress people, legal luminaries and legal icons. And to have Jupiter in Aquarius, the sign of fair treatment, is quite obvious. Right there in the first house, retrograde, repeated. Jupiter can also be a professor, and the president did did teach the practice of law. He did teach law in law school as well. He was a law professor, I suppose is the phrase I'm grappling here for. Okay, so now the ancient astrologers would have it. They would say, okay, Jupiter is going to add his ways, his methods of getting the primary objective that's shown by the president's ascendant. That's right. Looking at this chart, we can say right off the bat that one of the most important things, if not the most important thing to this native, President Barack Obama, is the freedom of expression and movement. That's what Aquarius rising wants. Not necessarily any kind of direction or purpose to this freedom of movement, or this expression, but just the freedom to do it the way he wants and how he wants. Now, Aquarius is a fixed sign. It's fixed. It's masculine. And a fixed air sign is going to hoard knowledge, to hoard information. This obviously this conduces to a career in Washington. Aquarius really is such a complicated and complex sign because even though it belongs to the air element, it's traditionally been associated with waterworks, with canals. In America's birth chart, the sign of Aquarius has very much to do with the public access to waterways and canals and the legal battles revolving around the intricate system of canals that connected societies back in the formative years of this nation. So this is not trivial. This is not a small thing, Aquarius's associations with water and with canals and with rivers, etc., and also with the engineering of these things, with hydro engineering, hydroelectric engineering, etc. Excuse me. So this is where Jupiter is placed. Very much the mark of a legal eagle, very much the mark of a professor, and very much the mark of a philosophical humanitarian, interestingly enough. Souring the picture somewhat, we have the South Node almost exactly conjunct the ascendant at 27 degrees Aquarius. It's partile conjunct, meaning they occupy the same degree. And this diminishes somewhat the goodness of the ascendant as far as I'm concerned. It decreases. There's actually been a debate among astrologers whether or not the nodal axis represents increase and decrease or gain and loss, which are two slightly different things. So far, the debate seems to be leaning in favor of increase versus decrease, with the north node increasing whatever it contacts and the south node decreasing the same. And here, with the south node decreasing the ascendant, the obvious worry is that there is a decrease of affairs revolving around the ascendant. Skill, wit, talent, vitality, things of that nature. Now, so we understand a little bit of the president's primary motivation, the freedom to express himself and the freedom to move about wherever he wants, the freedom for mobility, freedom of movement. And also the methods to get this is going to be a very self-seeking, a very center-seeking method of acquiring knowledge, that a method that hoards knowledge, that doesn't so much transmit freely, but rather takes in instead of broadcasting. Jupiter in the ascendant rules the second house of finances and also rules the 11th house, so this is very much a financial Jupiter, a Jupiter tied to his social life and his career. No surprise there. Now, moving on. What other pertinent features are in the chart? Well, let's just look at the luminaries. Obviously, we notice a huge stellium of planets and also the North Node in Leo. I might as well go ahead and bring up the idea now that I use whole sign houses and quadrant system houses. I switch between these routinely in my practice, and the results are quite illuminating, to say the least. I do have a rhyme and a reason for doing this, but I tell you, I reserve the right to change it in the future. It's still sort of in an experimental phase. I dare you to find any astrologer who's not really experimenting with her or his house cusps. For one thing, there are so many systems of house cusps out there, folks, that, I mean, seriously, unless you're just devoid of any curiosity whatsoever, it's hard not to experiment with different house cusps. And furthermore, astrology has more than one branch, folks. So they're different. I use different house systems for different branches, for different applications. For horary work, I might use Regiomontanus or Koch. For natal work such as this, I'll stick with either Alcibiades or Placidus, always switching between whole signs throughout. We don't really have enough time to go into the difference between the two. Maybe we'll do another show on that at some point, but there's loads of information on it in the internet, so it's really a simple concept. One of those things, astrology is full of concepts like this, very simple to understand, but devilishly difficult to explain clearly. I don't know why that is. Okay, my whole point, the reason I bring this up is because that stellium I mentioned is in the 7th house by whole sign, but also the 6th house by Alcibiades or Placidus, the more popular house cusp systems. Let me see. This makes things more complex. This renders the entire area of the president's partnerships very, very much more complex than usual, than the average. For one thing, it merges the domains of servitude and skills with partnership. Now, by partnership, let me point out that I'm not necessarily talking about romance here for our president, but also business alliances, which are important for the president, and also open conflicts, open enmities, lawsuits, things of that nature, which are obviously important now, especially in light of the rumblings in Congress to sue the president. And by the way, folks, we're still trying to get Steve Frampton on the air here. Poor fellow, he's having some technical difficulties, which happens from time to time. And wait a second, do we actually have a caller? This is the first for me, folks. Hang on, I'm going to try to actually bring a caller on the air. I'm an astrologer and not necessarily a technical wizard. Okay, anyway, moving on. Let's go back to the president's birth chart. As I was saying before, the 6th house, the affairs of the 6th house and the affairs of the 7th house are going to be mixed. So let's first look at the 7th house, the domain of the president's partnerships. I'm talking every romantic partnership from the little girl, his first kiss in grammar school, to his college girlfriend, to the First Lady, Mrs. Obama, and also including every business partnership. Everything is crammed right in there to the 7th house. And the cusp of the 7th house is in Leo, so the sun rules it. The sun, it rules the 7th house cusp, and so Leo is on that. Now, a good part of the sign of Leo, it overlaps into the 6th house, just beneath it. And in fact, by the quadrant house systems, Placidus and Alcibiades, that's where the sun is. That's also where Mercury is, and Uranus. In fact, that's where the entire stellium is, practically. And so this is what complicates the picture. What it's saying here is that since the sun rules the 7th house of partnership and is inside the 6th house of servants, then the sun will create partners out of servants, or better said, will create a servant out of the partner. Do you see? First of all, by being placed in the 6th house of servitude, the sun will cause the 7th house of partnership to come into existence. So the 6th house is obviously important to the president, especially with the humanitarian urges of his natal Jupiter, right? That extraordinarily potent benefic. And let me just say that having Jupiter in the 1st house, for lack of a better term, is just damned lucky. Very, very lucky. The literature is very clear about this. To have Jupiter rising in the 1st house is considered a good fortune. So score 1 for the president on that one. That's an extreme good fortune. And the reason I brought that up is because this explains a lot about the mysterious sixth house. By no means am I trying to say that our president enjoys service to others, even though he probably does. What I am saying is that it's important to him in a professional sense. And service, again, we must not think servile. You see, in this category will also fit people who do your work for you, like your mechanics, also your accountant, and things of that nature, your physician. So these sorts of people, his advisors also, are important to him as well. And the North Node is in this area of the chart. And this is where the president will find a lot of good fortune. Now, it's a fair question. Of the three planets in the seventh house, which one would be a symbol for Mrs. Obama, the First Lady? Very good question. We have some contenders, Mercury and the Sun being the two main contenders. I discount Uranus as being a symbol for the wife, even though I am pretty sure that the First Lady's behavior in her private moments with our president can be quite Uranian in the sense of sudden and unexpected. Michelle Obama is definitely no cream puff, to say the least. She is a remarkable personage in her own right. And so, wow, it's really hard. I can totally see the Sun in Leo as representing the First Lady, but because the Sun in Leo actually contacts, well, no, it's too wide. That's a close one. I'm actually favoring Mercury in Leo for the simple fact that A, Mercury, as far as gender is concerned, is a bi-planet to begin with. It can be either gender. And B, it comes closest to the cusp. So it seems to have a temporal primacy over the Sun. In other words, Barack Obama is going to encounter Mercury in Leo in his life before he encounters Sun in Leo, and it would say that he perhaps meets his wife, earlier than meeting the Sun as representing his presidency. That's fine, but of course the Sun works as well. The Sun is in the bounds, the terms of Saturn, and that's one reason also why I prefer the Sun as referring to the president. Now, I'm getting a text from Steve here. Poor fella. He's having a devil of a time getting on. I hope he does get online here shortly. At any rate, he's trying. Now, I said earlier that our president, there are some elements on our president's chart that seem other-directed. And what I mean by that, it can be shown by the Sun in Leo, in the terms of Saturn. Saturn rules that section of Leo that goes from about 11 Leo right on up to 18 Leo. So it's a sizable patch there that belongs to Saturn, and the Sun is in that degree range. And this functions as effectively as a conjunction between the Sun and Saturn. You see, and what this it translates to in terms of the president's immediate experience in life is limitation to his will. The freedom of his will is limited by the Sun's placement in the terms of Saturn. You see, and so this right there is, and in the sixth house signification of the Sun in Leo, as opposed to the seventh house signification of it, then we see that the president's what he's known for is service, as in service to the community. And it's a limitation to whatever it is he might want to do in life at that time. It's a career builder, in other words. Do you see? Now, moving on from the Sun, let's look at some other reasons why the president perhaps might not be able to govern in the White House the way that he would like. And we're looking at Neptune, of course. Neptune, by its very nature, is subversive. But natally, the president has his Sun in a square with Neptune. And he also has Neptune in the 10th house. by whole sign, okay, not by Alcibiades. Now, this is very interesting, and this is why the switching house systems is important. This is why it helps, because when you do that, then you're capable of seeing that the president's actual midheaven, the degree point of his midheaven, the point in the sky where the sun culminated, was not in the 10th house. It wasn't in the 10th sign from the ascendant, but it was in the 11th sign from the ascendant. The president's ascendant's in Aquarius. Okay, his midheaven's in Sagittarius, the 11th sign from the ascendant. This is the figure of someone whose career is wrapped up very, very tightly with his social life. Compare that with President Thomas Jefferson, someone that we see a lot, who's getting a lot of press these days. His midheaven was in the 9th house. And this is a configuration of the philosopher king, someone whose career is more based on philosophy and ideals and principles. You see, now I'm not saying that President Thomas Jefferson is more principled than President Barack Obama, even though Thomas Jefferson is sort of experiencing a resurgence these days in the form of Facebook memes and conspiracy theory shrines. That doesn't mean that Thomas Jefferson is a crackerjack political theorist. Okay, many of his theories were quite extreme, and as American history demonstrates, a lot of his ideas had to have they had to wait until they could be couched in more moderate terms before they could be born into life. Now, we don't have time really to go into a history lesson here, as much as I would like. I'm still trying to get poor Steve here with us. Poor fella. Bear with me, guys. I'm multitasking to an insane degree. And you know what? It sucks because I'm not really a good multitasker. I'm a deep thinker, not a fast one. Like when I have to think fast, I just sort of like get all frazzled, you know? I'm like, please don't make me do stuff. But I'm trying to bridge this technological gulf that's happening here. And also trying to lecture about the ideological differences between a newly popular president, Thomas Jefferson, and the current sitting president, Barack Obama. And don't forget, we're about to get to a forecast of President Barack Obama in just a few minutes here, probably the last hour and a half of our broadcast tonight. But I want to point out another salient feature of this chart before we move on to that solar return. And this Neptune, we just talked about Neptune. We're talking about the midheaven and how it's sort of skewed away from the 10th place of the ascendant and paints the portrait of a president whose administration is very tightly wound up in the social sphere and in organizations. The 11th house has to do with organizations as well. Now, Neptune in the 10th place from the ascendant. You know what springs to mind, folks? Chelsea, I forget her last name. Christ. The WikiLeaks person. Oh, God. I forget the person's name. Edward Snowden is by far the more famous one. Also, he was represented by Neptune as well. Neptune in Scorpio. Scorpio, as I've said a gazillion times, and it's certainly not my idea, for sure, but Scorpio has a touch of the vindictive about it. So Neptune, which naturally represents dissolution. Neptune, which naturally represents espionage and subversion, is all up in the president's government, is in the 10th house. This is a very, very close place for the enemy to be, for Neptune to be. So this is also why I tend to see this Neptune as a symbol for Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. And this is what I find to be the most beautiful thing about astrology. This is what makes astrology spiritual for me personally. Here it is in Barack Obama's natal chart, before he was president, when he was just an infant. It's saying that there's going to be someone in his work, in his profession, someone very close to him who's going to betray him out of vengeance. Now, I'm not saying that Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden had personal vendetta against President Obama. I'm not saying that at all. But President Obama, as any national leader is, represents the collective. He represents the constellated desires of the collective in any given moment. And not just the president, but any dictator or any national leader. Do you see? And so an affront against the president is an affront against the United States of America, even if it's done ostensibly for the benefit of Americans. And thus I argue that Neptune at 8 degrees, 36 minutes Scorpio is a very, very potent sign for Edward Snowden and for Chelsea Manning. Now, interesting to note, the ruler of the 10th sign of the ascendant, the ruler of that 10th sign, which represents his career, is Mars. Mars is in Virgo in the 8th house by whole sign. As far as I'm concerned, this is also very bluntly stating that the 8th house is other people's money, represents investments, represents trade, foreign trade for the nation. Tells me that the president's career is going to revolve around foreign trade for America when he's president. The president's career in general is going to revolve around investment. And look how aggressively that Mars works and operates with other people's money. Mars in the 8th house is going to spend other people's money quite aggressively. Obamacare springs to mind, especially when Mars is coupled with the health-conscious sign of Virgo. Do you see? When Mars is in Virgo, this is very much saying Obamacare. And all of this is compressed into the meaning of Mars at 22 degrees of Virgo when President Obama was born back in 1961. This is fascinating. This is very good stuff. Now, of course, after Mars in Virgo has been created, after the Obamacare is in place, or during his non-presidential years, after the other people's money has been thoroughly sopped up like juice using a biscuit, then the 10th house is created and the president has a career. And then in turn, Mars is created again. And so as is the case with all the planets and their houses, there's a cyclical, a circular relationship. Do you see? Now, note closely, Mars in the president's chart is ruled by Mercury at 2 degrees of Leo. And so this shows how Mars comes into existence. You might reasonably wonder, how on earth can President Barack Obama get Mars to operate in people's money like that? Wouldn't the people say, no, hey, no thanks? Well, Mercury in Leo is a very dramatic speaker, very charismatic. He's the one who creates Mars in my money and your money and everybody else's money. He's the one who creates it. Mercury, the president's oratory, for which he's famous. Mercury in the 7th house of relationships and partnerships. And so this is very interesting. And now we see the president's value to others, perhaps, who might have vested interest in Barack Obama as president of the United States. His ability to mobilize public opinion for surrendering their money. This is very valuable to the things represented by Saturn in Capricorn, no? Saturn in Capricorn wants to engineer the wealth of Capricorn, the established wealth of Capricorn, wants to engineer authority and security. I mean, some conspiracy theorists might posit that it's no accident that President Barack Obama seems to gel so congruently with President Bush's Patriot Act. You know, on the surface, it might seem odd that a Democrat would sanction and further the continuity of a Republican president's legal milestone or legacy, as it were. One might reasonably expect the Democrat president to dismantle that Republican legal construct, especially if it's as wildly, astonishingly unpopular as the Patriot Act is. And yet, far from dismantling the Patriot Act, President Barack Obama seems to be quite enthusiastically keeping it around. And this, as far as I'm concerned, is explained by the Saturn in Capricorn, which not only is going to engineer authority, it's going to do so secretly. Folks, we definitely don't know the whole picture here with this Saturn. That's very safe to say. Very safe to say. And look at its retrograde nature. This is going to render the Saturn very defiant, rebellious, and it's going to give it a chronic flair. It's going to make it happen over and over again, is what I'm trying to say. Do you see? And so, this is significant. This is significant. Now, where was I? I was musing to my brother the other day that for all the world, this chart looks like the chart of an expert jailer, with Saturn so highly dignified in the 12th house. For all the world, this looks like the chart of a prison warden, because of the 12th house's traditional associations with confinement and with prisons, or a hospital administrator, which I figured, and this was part of my jest with my brother, I figured that would be grist for the conspiracy theorists' mills, saying that America, they would probably hypothesize that America's morphed into one huge, comfortable prison. Well, certainly the power dynamics shown by Saturn in Capricorn in the 12th house are quite interesting. And Barack Obama would have been born during the conjunction phase, the seed phase of a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, a 20-year cycle. And so his ascendance to the presidency, his life and his career are probably going to exemplify the ideas shown in that cycle. And the cycle started in Capricorn. And the cycle, its themes are, expansionism versus caution, greed versus regulation, etc. Jupiter versus Capricorn. Now, so we see a lot of subterfuge in the chart. The aggressive action of Mars and other people's money. The sort of private, secret machinations of shadowy figures behind the scenes. The president's oratory as facilitating the public surrendering of their money. Do you see? All of these are significant. Now, let's look a little bit at the solar return. Now, for those of you interested, I just want to say that there's also a debate between whether or not to relocate the solar return. For example, the president was born in Honolulu, but he doesn't live there anymore. He lives in Washington, D.C. Shouldn't we relocate the solar return for Washington, D.C.? Well, no. The one cast for the site of his birth is the one that holds. Now, first of all, let's define what a solar return is. For those who might not know, a solar return is essentially a specialized transit chart. That's all it is. It's a transit. It's an anniversary chart, a birthday chart. The solar return is a chart cast for when the sun returns to its degree in minute that it occupied when you were born. Okay? And the resulting chart is highly significant. Highly significant, such is the power of the solar return that it can take a negative natal outlook and forecast and actually change it for the better, and the reverse. It can downgrade a rosy picture that's painted by the natal figure. So solar returns are extremely important. Okay? Before we get into the return, I would also like to talk about the concept of the Time Lord. This is also very important, and it's a vital aspect of my technique. The Time Lord system says that When a planet rules a period of time, then it has power to act. It has power to create the things that it promises to create in your chart. See? And the brilliant thing about astrology is that there is a very delicate hierarchy, very intricately interwoven hierarchy of various time lords active at any given time. Okay? Ponder that for a second. There's a network of time lords. Let's turn to the technique of profections, another vital method in my toolkit. Now, with profections, nothing is actually moving. There are no astronomical movements involved with the profections versus the solar return, which, as I said, is a transit chart. It's all about moving bodies. The profected chart is not like that at all. Essentially, what you do when you profect the chart is you take the significator and you move it 1 unit of distance for 1 unit of time, usually 1 degree for 1 day. Do you see? Or essentially, when you profect the ascendant through the house, for example, the 30 degrees, it takes a whole year for that ascendant to go 1 degree at a time from 0 to 30 degrees of the sign. It goes from degree to degree every 12.175 days. And in this way, throughout the entire year, it goes throughout the sign. And then it arrives to the next sign. Now, this brings another house to rule over the year. This is a Time Lord system, okay? Because where that profected ascendant is at, the ruler of that place is a Time Lord. It's going to have influence over the whole year. It's going to have power to act, do you see? It's going to be a player in that person's life. So, who are the pertinent Time Lords for President Barack Obama? This is the pertinent question. There are going to be several that we have to consider here. First, by moving the ascendant in the way that I described, using profections, then on his birthday in 2014, the ascendant will have moved to the 6th house. It's been making this movement ever since he was born. Okay? Every 12 years it's been coming back to its ascendant, to the ascendant's degree. Every 12 years, like clockwork. We're talking about a phenomenon that has a very seasonal feeling to it. Okay? A very seasonal feeling, and the profections are invaluable for that purpose, for highlighting the seasonal aspects of your life. You know, where things seem to come back around in a cyclical or a periodic way. Now, so the president's having a 6th house year. His 6th house by whole sign and Alcibiades or Placidus is Cancer. Okay? And now this means that the moon is going to be Lord of the year. This is very important because now we finally turn to the solar return chart. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to find the moon in the solar return chart because this is the Lord of the year. So we want to compare the quality of the Lord of the year in both the solar return and in the president's birth chart. Right? Now in the birth chart, the moon occupies the 3rd degree of Gemini, conjunct the 4th house cusp at 6 degrees Gemini. Right? So, is the moon in any better shape in the solar return? The moon at 24 degrees of Scorpio. Let's see, what house is the moon in the return? 1 second, let me double check that. In the return, the moon occupies the 12th house. That is not good. So the natal moon seems to be in better shape than the solar return moon. So we're comparing the Lord of the Year in both charts. To have the Lord of the Year in the 12th house can be, the technical word for it is a bummer. The 12th house, if you guys are following along with me,
and by now you're catching on, the 12th house is kind of difficult for most things. For most things. Now, it does have its positive applications. I might share with you that in doing work for myself, a professional astrologer, I was very scared to see the 12th house highlighted during various functions and forecasts, but time has proven that these have to do with the 12th house's mystical aspects, with its significations for seeing beyond things. So when you're looking at the chart of a spiritual person, of a guru, or a tarot card reader, or a preacher, or somebody like that, somebody who makes their living, whose profession is in spiritual matters, then the 12th house could have a more benign cast to it. But our president is not a preacher. Neither is he a tarot card reader. Neither is he a shaman or an alchemist or an astrologer or a Catholic priest. He's a politician. He's a lawyer. Interestingly enough, the astrology says what he really is a businessman. The class of his chart is mercantile. He's a merchant by the astrology of it. It's just so happened that in the complexity of the modern era, his mercantile function is being shunted through the guise of a political leader. But his magisterium, as the technical term is called, his profession is essentially mercantile. Now, so the Lord of the Year. What is the Lord of the Year promising? First of all, well, in the natal third house and fourth house, we have to decide which we're going to use here. Well, I'm sorry, fourth house or fifth house, not third house. The question really is Gemini on the fourth house or not? And if you use a quadrant house system like Placidus or Alcibiades or Regiomontanus or Campanus or what have you, then the president's fourth house will indeed be in Gemini. But if you use the whole sign house system, then the fifth house is in Gemini. That's very interesting. Now, so one thing the moon is promising, it's promising children. By quadrant sign, the fifth house of children in quadrant house systems is in the moon sign of Cancer. Cancer is a very, very fertile sign. Okay, but of course the president at 53 years old, we can safely say is not going to have a baby this year. So the moon as Lord of the Year, as ruler of the perfected sixth house, is not promising children for the president. Well, the fifth house also refers to investments because of its signification for gambling and speculation, do you see? And now we're getting to something here. I think now we're hitting pay dirt. The fifth house signification of investment could be a delineation match here for the moon as a time lord, because there's additional testimony that the president will be oriented toward his own personal finances this year and also the economy of the nation. The president's going to be all about the money this year. I think that he's going to be setting up his post-presidential windfall, his post-presidential professional activities, and post-presidential financial opportunities. It's definitely not too early to set those up, which, it makes sense. But, of course, the dynamics of the solar return when compared to the natal chart also back this up. But we're sort of putting the cart ahead of the horse here. Poor Steve is still struggling to get on. I got somebody on hold. I don't know how to get... Hello? Hello? You're on the air. Okay, this is the first time we've had a live caller on the air. I've just noticed you there. I saw that you were on hold for 42 minutes. That's kind of a long time.
I'm just listening. I don't have my hand raised. I'm just listening.
Oh, you're just listening. Okay, showed you as dialing in. My bad. Well, I'll just let you go back to listening then. Sorry. I thought maybe you were my partner Steve trying to get on here. My bad. Okay, let's get back to what we were talking about here. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
Definitely not a technological wizard here. Returning back to the president's solar return. Where was I before I so rudely interrupted myself? Yes, we were talking about the Time Lords and what the moon is promising for the president this year as Time Lord. Okay, well, fifth house investments. Okay, seems to have a financial tang to it. I'm switching back to quadrant signs. Then let me do that real fast. Then Gemini slides right on back, and we see that the fourth house is there. Well, the issue is that the nadir, the actual point of the fourth house cusp, is in the sign of Gemini. The moon is conjunct that. This makes the moon angular very powerful. The fourth house is real estate. So could we have investments in real estate, sort of digging into the president's personal life here, which might not be polite, but we're doing it anyway. Real estate. Also, the fourth house, looking in a more mundane sense, the fourth house pertains to things like the homeland security, for example. And the fifth house has to do with things like election, although 2014, to my knowledge, isn't any kind of an election year. I'm certainly no political scientist, so I'm not going to venture a guess on that. I'm more inclined to think in terms of real estate for the president this year, in terms of what the moon means as a lord, as a time ruler, what the Hellenistic Greeks would have referred to as a chronocrator. Now, interestingly, the president's natal figure has the part of fortune in the fourth house by whole sign at 6 degrees of Taurus. So that right there says that the president is going to monetarily benefit from real estate, bluntly put. Now, let's return to the solar return figure to see what Lord of the Year, Moon, is going to promise for the president in terms of the solar return. Where is Cancer in the solar return? We have that on the 8th house cusp. There's going to be some anxiety there. Excuse me, the 8th house, it has to do also with investments, of course, being the second house from the 7th. It represents the money that his business partners bring to the table to do business. It represents also the money of any litigants who are opposing him in the courts. It represents the money of the population, the tax funds, in other words, sort of zooming out and looking at these figures in a more mundane perspective instead of a more personal one. So the 8th house is going to represent tax funds, the public funds. And, taking a cue from more modern psychological astrology, they attribute anxiety to the 8th house. And to be quite frank, the ancients did as well. The 8th house has always had a negative connotation, mainly because it does not aspect the ascendant by major Ptolemaic aspect. If you notice, the 4th house and the 10th house are at a square configuration to the ascendant. The descendants at an opposition to the ascendant, right? The 5th house and the 9th house and the 11th house all are, and the 3rd house all are either trine or sextile the ascendant, but the 8th house are none of these. So this is traditionally why it's had a negative connotation. So that's what the moon is promising for the president in the solar return. Now let's look at some other time lords here. We turn to the Firdaria. The president now is 53 years old. He was born at night, so this means that he is of a specific sequence of Firdaria time lords. People born during the day have a different sequence than people born during the night. It is now 2014, the president's birthday, and he's actually going to be closing out his sun period on his birthday next year. So he's in the final year of his sun period, which sort of makes sense. His presidency is going to be coming to a close shortly thereafter in 2016. But the sub-period ruler of the Firdaria is Mars. So Sun and Mars are pertinent in the solar return. Let's see how they're doing. Where is it? I've got so many doggone charts here that I do not know what to do with myself. Okay, here we go. Now, we talked about Mars earlier in the show natally. Natally speaking, he's in the president's 7th house by quadrant house systems. If you switch over to whole sign, then you see that Mars has an 8th house symbolism as well. And we talked about this as being very aggressive with other people's money. Oh, look, I have a flash from Steve. Oh, let me get Steve in here so he can give my voice a rest. Man, I have been gabbing up a storm.
It's been all about the President Barack Obama tonight, and I'm really glad about that. Hey,
Stephen.
Hello, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I've only just got home.
Well, we're definitely happy to have you here. I dragged some poor anonymous person on the air thinking that they were you, and they were just someone trying to listen to the show. So I was so excited. I was so excited to have you here now to sort of get your take on America's president and his birth chart, his solar return figure, and things of that nature. You know, better late than never. We were just talking about some of the various Time Lords, Steve, and looking at them in his natal chart and in his solar return chart. And I noticed that the president is is in the final year of his main sun period in the Firdaria. His 13-year-long sun period, where the sun ruled as Time Lord for 13 years. That's about to come to a close for President Barack Obama, and he's about to embark upon his Venus period. Do you see? We're definitely live, if you're curious about that.
Yeah, how embarrassing. I thought we were starting at 8. I thought we were doing 8 until 10.
We did talk about that. Yes.
It's okay, no problem. Yeah, I thought that we were going to switch to 8 until 10 for people on the Pacific coast. I know there were some requests for us to move the show to a little later, but it's not a problem. So you've been discussing the outlook for Obama, given that it's almost his birthday.
Right, absolutely. I figured let's let President Obama be the focus of the show tonight, and we'll go from there. I mean, it's a big deal. It's his birthday on Monday, I want to say, the 4th, and his chart is very interesting. We talked preliminarily about his Saturn in Capricorn. I noticed that it's very, very tightly associated with the 12th house, and I talked about that as Saturn is representing sort of engineering, and Capricorn representing authority and power and control, and I was like, wow, engineering control privately, secretly in the 12th house, wouldn't Alex Jones have a field day with that?
Yeah, well, and also it's an interesting time for Obama, or to discuss Obama, given the developments and the decision to sue him.
Right.
And my understanding is that this is the first time ever that a president has been sued by the House of Representatives, isn't it?
Yes, and that could be why we were talking, when we were talking earlier about the different Time Lords. I saw that by using the technique of profections, the ascendant has profected to the 6th house, which makes the moon also a Time Lord for the year. So I was like, well, let's see what the moon's doing in the solar return and in the natal chart. And, I was like, wow, it really looks like it's oriented toward real estate investments. And, just looking at the solar return, it's very heavily preoccupied with his personal finances. And maybe this is why, Steve, maybe he's looking at his real estate portfolio, looking for a way perhaps to lessen the impact of any litigation. Do you see? Maybe that's something.
It's a very interesting time. I haven't analysed Obama's major progressed aspects yet, but when you look at his chart, one of the things that stands out is the south node of the moon in the 1st house, which generally makes for quite a nice character, but it is one of the signs that a person can have problems in terms of the way they present themselves or their personal choices, almost as though you become your own downfall.
Right.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do see what you mean, and I think that's very much an issue here, because Neptune in the solar return is in the president's natal 1st house, and I really think that his natal Neptune in Scorpio is a very good symbol of not only Chelsea Manning but also Edward Snowden. And the reason I think that is because Scorpio is the 10th sign from the ascendant, which gives it very much a 10th house feel, even though his actual midheaven is in the 11th sign from the ascendant. the 10th sign is Scorpio. So this is very much saying to me, hey, you're going to have someone very close to your government, the 10th house, that's going to betray you. Neptune is going to be subversive. And so this factor is now in the solar return chart, and it's now lined up with the president's first house. So publicity factors could definitely have a negative impact in 2014, Steve, as well.
Yeah, and he does have Saturn in the 12th house.
Yeah.
And Jupiter in the 12th house as well, an interesting combination. And I almost used to think, well, gosh, Obama seemed to come from nowhere. I didn't realize that he was a potential president, to be honest. I hadn't really heard of Obama until the run up to the election, and so his rise to that position was interesting, almost surprising in a way. And I think that that's described by his Jupiter in Aquarius in the 12th house, but also that Saturn is there as well. So he possibly isn't able to pinpoint exactly what's going on behind the scenes, and particularly who his enemies might be. So it's almost as though the people that are against him are not all out in the open. So it's very much about the Republicans, isn't it? But I think that there are others, as you suggested.
Right.
And I think that that's reflected by Saturn in his 12th house.
I agree.
And also it's that Saturn that rules his south node in the first house.
You know something, Steve? There are also other indications in the chart for this very same thing. Saturn he casts his Anticyon to very close to the degree of the midheaven in Sagittarius. And conversely, the Anticyon of the midheaven is conjunct Saturn. Now, for those in the audience who might not be familiar with Anticia, these are very cunningly placed, very logically placed shadow points that a planet has. And so if planet B occupies the Anticyon, the shadow point of planet A, it's as if planet B is conjunct planet A, even though planet B and planet A might bodily be very far away from any kind of real conjunction. And so this is a very shadowy type of connection between Saturn and the president's midheaven, his public activity, his public deed. And another testimony in favor of being other-directed is the square between Neptune and the Sun. You know, this to me is like almost a psychic medium type of aspect, in the sense that there are other forces impinging upon the president's free will, as shown by the Sun. This is demonstrated by the square. This means that the president is restricted in his free will. He can't just govern the way he would like to govern. Now,
yeah, I think though as well, when you go back to his natal chart, he has, if you include the midheaven, then he has a grand square in his chart, which
right.
is a particularly challenging configuration, and that square is up to the midheaven, the point of the chart that rules his career. I don't think that with a grand square connected to the midheaven, I would have chosen to be in that role if I'd had the opportunity. Would you?
What do you mean? What role?
If you had Obama's chart,
right,
that has this grand square, a fixed grand square, which connects to the midheaven, would you have chosen to be president if you'd had the opportunity? I think I would have stayed away from it.
I don't think I would choose to be president even if I didn't have the opportunity to adopt this chart. Now,
pretty thankless task, isn't it?
Well, we've seen how the president's hair has sort of just faded from that virile, black to sort of like looking like a little gray in there. But hey, he looks dignified with the salt and pepper. And yet, I'm trying to be nice to our president. I like President Barack Obama, even though I don't really agree with a lot of his politics. Like as a human being, I like the man.
Yes, yeah, he seemed, well, and again, that's described by the dynamics in his chart. So the south node of the moon in Aquarius, there's something unusually likable about him and his demeanor. And can you still hear me, Stephen?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh,
can you hear me?
I thought I'd lost you because the sound changed a little bit.
Oh, sorry about that.
But he's got 3 planets in Leo, so he's an outgoing character, somebody that you can feel a connection with, that you feel you can socialize with and interact with. So he's a good guy. I feel like he's a good guy. I've never felt otherwise about him, and I agree with some of his politics. I disagree with other things, but I think that's normal with pretty much any politician, any president. I can't think I would agree with absolutely everything, every choice that a president might make. But I felt when he took the presidency that it would probably be extremely challenging for him. I mean, it must have been very difficult. He's been blocked pretty much every which way he turns, and certainly now it looks like the last couple of years of his term will not really enable him to deliver a huge amount of change, because he's going to be blocked by the politicians in the U.S., the Republicans, and he's going to be distracted by this lawsuit.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the thing that interests me the most is, well, what worries me the most is, again, just and I hate to say this because, we bear in mind that we're talking about the President of the United States of America here. You know what I'm saying? There's a certain amount of sobriety,
for sure,
that goes along with that.
Mm-hmm. I've said before, Stephen, regardless of politics, I take my hat off to anybody that can take that office. The pressure, the responsibility is enormous.
Oh yeah,
it really is.
And the leader of a nation, as I've said earlier, the leader of a nation he represents sort of the aggregated desires and beliefs and ideals of that nation. So President Barack Obama and his family, the first family, also, they are America now. Do you see? This is, I think, the president's greatest success, and I think his biggest appeal is his archetypal magnetism, his ability to stand for all Americans, to bridge gaps between Americans. This is great. But looking at the chart, and in reference to the comments that you made earlier about the 12th house Saturn and things of that nature, I noticed that Mars, again, if we switch to the whole sign houses and we get Scorpio, if we consider Scorpio as having a professional signification, then Mars rules it. And Mars, again, using whole sign houses, is in the 8th sign from the ascendant, which is Virgo. So Mars has an 8th house sort of feel to him as well. This is very aggressive behavior with other people's money. And also, it's a very good picture for Obamacare, as I mentioned, but due to the health concerns, the hypochondriac nature of Virgo. Do you see? And so what we see here is that as a direct response to the president's behaviors, his 10th house, we have things like Obamacare. But I'm also concerned about the other manifestations of Mars in Virgo that undoubtedly manifested in his other business partnerships prior to his presidential life and will undoubtedly manifest in his post-presidential life. And this Mars is just very aggressive with other people's money. It arises out of the president's behavior, out of his government, out of his actions. Again, both pre- and post-presidential. And Mercury rules the Mars by sign. And so now we see how Mars comes to exist due to that charismatic orator, Mercury in Leo. The president's ability to talk is going to justify Mars's aggression with everybody's money. Do you see? And so this to me really seems to spotlight the president's effectiveness and utility to that shadowy 12th house Saturn in Capricorn. Do you see?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think it's interesting as well, though, Stephen. Again, when you look at his natal chart, and I'm using the Placidus house system, but you see that the moon is in opposition to the midheaven in his chart. And the midheaven in his chart is in the bends of the nodes. So overall, he's not a particularly popular president. And that's not an opinion. That seems to be fact based upon the ratings. So again, that's described by the opposition of the moon to the midheaven. And I think that he's lost a lot of support, and I at times can't quite get my head around how it is that he's lost the support of people so much.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. That's a good call too, noticing that or bringing out that opposition from the moon to the midheaven. Because
again, you see, if you were his advisor, if you were his astrologer, and he was running for presidency, you'd probably say, look, this is going to be really challenging for you, and I think you need to go into this with your eyes open and your suit of armor, and you need to be aware that for whatever reason, the people ultimately won't really be behind you. They won't really have your back because the moon in Gemini opposes your midheaven. And your midheaven's in the bends of the nodes.
Yeah, that's it. And it's applying, too. That's the worst part. Because it signifies the fact that, the moon at 3 Gemini, it still has 3 more degrees to go before it reaches 6 Gemini. At 6 Gemini, it's going to be exact. And so this means that as the president progresses in his life journey, the things signified by that opposition are going to worsen. They're going to become more prominent, you see. And you're quite right in saying that President Obama has sort of slipped in the popularity polls. Now people... this is what...
And it's strange because, like you said, he seems like a really nice guy. Even if you dislike his politics, how can you dislike him as a person? He seems very affable, very respectful, the kind of person you can connect with. So it's sort of odd that people don't seem to be behind him.
We come back to Neptune square the sun again because... during the election, the first election when President Obama ascended to the White House and was elected, there was a certain, how can I put this? There was a certain karmic import to this. America, as everybody knows, has a rather troubled history when it comes to race relations.
Mm-hmm.
And so for America, for all of us, it seemed that President Obama was a way to ease that karma. Like I said, to bridge gaps. A way to say, this is America now. We're not slave mongers. We're good people. And I think this fostered the illusions of Neptune.
I think it's a really good call as well, Stephen. The square between the Sun and Neptune. You're right. I really think that's an excellent point. And again, you see, considering that and the comments about the moon, his honeymoon was very short. So there was this real feel-good factor. Even for other nations, there was a great feel-good factor that this African-American man has become president. And you think of the symbolism of it. An African-American family occupies the White House. It's fascinating, and I think generally around the world people were very excited about it. But in America, the honeymoon was very short, and you're right to say that that's partly because his sun, his essence, his authority is squared by Neptune. So there is disillusionment, there is probably deception and disappointment. It's a good call.
Those concepts you're talking about, the concepts of breaking racial barriers, the concepts of of racial equality and things of that nature. These were symbolized that during the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycle that occurred in February of 1961, shortly before the president's birth. So President Obama, we can say, is a product of that cycle. Now, looking at his solar return figure and juxtaposing that or superimposing it on top of his natal figure, we see that transiting Jupiter is moving to square transiting Saturn. So we see that we're at the incoming waning phase of that very idealistic Jupiter-Saturn phase, that Jupiter-Saturn cycle of equality versus racism, of egalitarianism versus elitism. All of these things represented by the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn when the president was born. So he's an expression of that cycle. Do you see? And he fits into that cycle. And, it's interesting to note how that cycle relates to his natal figure and to the solar return. So, but the point I wanted to make was that the fact that the particular dynamics of the cycle are such that now it's waning means that the optimism and buoyancy of the cycle has faded. Do you see? And that now the outlook is much more grim and much more practical, much more realistic, etc. As a whole, this is a mundane movement, but it applies to the president as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think with this legal action, firstly, well, it is obviously it's unprecedented that a president is being sued. But when you look at Obama's natal chart, and you consider that the strongest aspect in the chart is that opposition between the moon and the midheaven, which we said is problematic.
Right.
But I think, if my memory serves me correctly, the second strongest opposition or aspect, in fact, in this chart is an opposition between Mercury, planet of law and legal dealings and communications and contracts, opposed by Saturn, tucked away mysteriously in his 12th house. So if you were a client, you would advise him to be cautious in life when it comes to legal matters and litigation, because that aspect alone suggests that he could be on the receiving end of litigation. And also, you see, when you consider that his 7th house, which is also the house of lawsuits, legal action, it's his second most powerful house, so it's a very prominent theme in his chart, but it is also a very discordant house, so partnerships and relationships can be unfortunate or need to be carefully managed for him, and legal matters, legal exposure needs to be carefully managed for him. I think his saving grace, though, is his extremely powerful and very harmonious 12th house. It's almost like the man has some sort of angelic protection. I don't think, and I'll progress his chart and have a look out into the next couple of years, as I'm sure you will, but I don't think much will come of this lawsuit. I think it's just going to be a bummer, and it's going to get in the way of the agenda, his agenda for the last 18 months or so, a couple of years of his presidency, and it's a disappointment. But I don't think anything concrete will come of it, because he's got this very fortunate 12th house, and I often consider the 12th house to be almost the hand of spirit, and I feel that he somehow will come out of it okay, that he'll be fortunate, but it's the process, the annoyance of the process, that is unfortunate for him. Do you agree that, you see, his best planet by far is Jupiter? This powerful Jupiter, extremely harmonious at 0 degrees of Aquarius, tucked away there in the 12th house. And it is retrograde, but so what? This is a man that can pull rabbits out of his hat when he needs to.
Oh yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. He certainly, we can use the Arabic technique of, I say Arabic, but it was used in the Arabic medieval astrology, the technique of directing by triplicities to just sort of get through broad brushstrokes what the president's life will be like in various dimensions. The technique works like this. We divide up the president's life into 3 equal portions. First, we have to know how long he's going to live. Well, I didn't really dip too far into that question. I didn't want to start out this exercise, asking such a morbid question, but I did want to check on the president's overall vitality and see, what the deal was with that. And to that, I look at something called the Hilaj. And this is the planet that represents the president's life force. And, as usual, there's more than one way to skin the cat. There's the technique used by Ptolemy to find the Hilaj, and by using that technique, the center of the president's life force is the sun. But by using Bonatti's technique to calculate the Hilaj, it's the moon. I usually prefer Bonatti's technique. This is fairly standard. So,
well, I see them as opposite ends of the battery that maintains us in life. So I think that they're both right. I think that they're both important. But interestingly, the sun is Obama's weakest planet.
Yeah.
So his vital force is not the best.
Well, yeah. The problem is that it dilutes his Leonine kingship by bending it toward compromise. It's in the 7th house. If this were a horary figure between two soccer teams, or pardon me, football teams, then I'd say, hey, the opposition's going to win here because the symbol for our team is in their camp. Mm-hmm. This isn't good, So that tells me, hey, maybe the president he spends too much time on negotiations, because I'll tell you something, this president definitely loves negotiation and business. His chart is not executive really so much as it is mercantile.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, actually. And it's just surprising, isn't it, that somebody with the sun as their weakest planet would end up as president.
Not surprising if you're going on the hypothesis that, hey, do we have a president here or do we have a functionary? Someone who's convenient to perhaps a more powerful and less visible oligarchy.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And I don't want to make the case for that so much, but I would say that Neptune square the sun, representing Neptune, external force impacting his ego, his sense of self, the sun. Saturn in the 12th house. These things are I think they represent that sort of shadowy sort of cabal or what have you. And also Mars in Virgo is the result of that. It's the sort of the value of that, because the president, I don't think, is the only one benefiting from Mars's activity and other people's money.
Yeah, and again, his powerful 12th house. There's something unusual, almost impossible to define about his success.
Well, there's something secret about him, too. I mean, out of all the presidents, and to be fair, this could be a consequence of the Internet era, but out of all the presidents, none has enjoyed or suffered, depending on how you look at it, a life in the tabloids like President Barack Obama. No, I mean, there's never surfaced any pictures of Bill Clinton's head, showing some Antichrist pattern, branded there. There have never been such wild theories that Ronald Reagan, was the 4th scion of Xenu.
Yeah, I mean, there are. But honestly, Stephen, I live in Tennessee, and I've spoken to neighbours of mine that truly believe he's the Antichrist. They honestly believe he's Antichrist.
That's what
I was speaking with my cousin in London, and she said, I was laughing because somebody said to me, some American person had said they thought that they were joking that Obama was the Antichrist. I said, but they're not joking. Some people actually believe this. They truly believe this.
Yeah, and those are the types of people who I include when I say, if you're taking psychiatric medications, you don't really need to consult with me. You need to consult with someone who has the letters M and D after their name. It's delusion. It's mental folly to think along those lines. I assure you, President Barack Obama is not a lizard person. But I mean, seriously, I'm thinking campaign contributors. Campaign contributors now. But my point is that the 12th house mystical elements of also are translating into this by with all these outlandish theories, that the president was born on the dark side of Mars, and that his veins are full of phlebotinum instead of blood. All these crazy crackpot theories. I think these are manifestations of the 12th house, and the retrograde nature of Saturn shows that it happens repeatedly. And now looking at Saturn as denial, and then looking at Capricorn as status, we see the reason for all of these balderdash claims, and it's to deny him the status of Capricorn that Capricorn represents. It's a snotty way of saying, okay, well, you might be president, but you'll never belong to the club.
Yeah, and he's a really smart man. He's got a very powerful Mercury, and it's very harmonious, and he's a fortunate man because of this wonderful Jupiter that he's got. And I would happily take on board this incredible Jupiter that he has in his chart. But again, his strongest aspects are an opposition and a parallel aspect at the same time between Mercury and Jupiter. So people were bound to say very unfortunate, very unkind, very silly things about him, and it was pretty much certain that he would be on the receiving end in life of legal action. It won't be the last time. But then his second most powerful aspect is Mercury again, parallel Pluto. So I don't think any of these things are particularly surprising, and I feel that he'll come out just fine, and he'll be very successful for the rest of his life. I'm interested, Stephen, to ask you to go back to the question of lifespan and longevity.
Okay.
Because I find that interesting, and I'm intrigued because, again, his sun, his vital force, is weak, and his first house of the physical body is his most challenging, his most discordant house.
Well, the ancient technique of or estimating lifespan was essentially twofold. First, you judge the person's life force. How much life force, how much will to live does this creature have? This was important in a day when more babies were born stillborn, not wanting to suckle. You could have a baby that wouldn't drink your milk and it would just die. Babies that would be abandoned by the mother. So there were a very complicated set of techniques involved to determine whether or not the chart you're looking at showed a miscarried something that was going to not live past 4 years old or what.
Well, also we're so complex that there obviously the physical body always fails.
Of course,
it will always fail.
Absolutely.
With certainties are you're born and you die. Well, as we said before, fortunately you don't die. Your physical body does, but you don't. And it's very predictable once you do the investigation, the work required to decipher the chart. It's easy to determine which part of the body fails first, and to calculate when that happens. But as you said, there are so many rules because this is such a complex matter. We are complex.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the ancient astrologer, well, I say ancient, he was active in the early parts of the, when we switched over from BC to AD. Anyway, Formicus Maternus, I paraphrase, he said as much. He was like, you can't have everything perfect in your chart. Something's got to kill you. You got to die somehow. So let's suppose you were born with the absolute perfect chart. According to this chart, you should live to the ripe old age of 1,083. However, even if that's the case, there are going to be so many solar returns and transit charts and other planetary returns, etc., that are going to chip away at that chart, eventually something's going to come along, something's going to pop up, and it's going to signify the end of you. So, your Jupiter or whatever might be golden right now, but 1 year, you're going to have a solar return chart where Jupiter's, at fall in Virgo in the 8th house and blah, 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 or whatever. Now, going back to that twofold method, the ancients wanted to first see what the life force was like, and then quantify it. They wanted to assign a numeric value to it. So first they would identify the life force by seeing what house it was in. They had a very, very strict set of rules for determining what planet could function as the Hilaj, the giver of years, the life force. Not any planet could do it. Arabic parts could serve. I've seen some charts where the part of fortune can function as the Halaj, the giver of years. But we don't still know yet how many years that the native is probably going to live. For that, we need something called the Al-Kalukhada. And that's the giver. The Hilaj is the giver of life. The Al-Kalukhada is the giver of years. Okay? So that's the nomenclature. So the Hilaj is going to say what kind of life force you have, and the Al-Kalukhada is going to say basically how many years you get. The Al-Kalukhada is a planet. It's a planet that aspects the Hilaj from one of the places of life in the chart, not just any old place. And depending on the state of the Al-Kalukhada, you give it either the Al-Kalukhada's minor years, its minor years, its middle years, or its major years. And then you have a very good ballpark figure of how long the person's going to live. Now, this is all outside the realm of, your house collapsing on you in the middle of the night and killing you by accident. That does not touch that. We're just talking about matters of vitality and the lifespan that you should get from that vitality. And there's also another factor involved called the killing planet. This is basically the planet that's going to be responsible for your ultimate death. It's in your chart, too. The end is in there just like the beginning is. And so it's an issue of finding out or calculating what the killing planet is. We do that by using an Al-Mutant table. We isolate the deadliest degree parts of a person's chart, and then we're essentially saying, hey, which planet has the most dignity in these places? And that planet is the killing planet. And then we use primary directions to direct that planet to the subject's ascendant. And that direction is called the Arcus Vitae, the arc of life. And that's essentially a graphical reputation of the lifespan right there, partner. That's it. When it gets to the end of that, buddy, it's about time to clock out. I mean, I've seen this thing work in many, many, many cases. Now, it doesn't work all the time. That's interesting. We got to remember, according to my belief at least, God is in control of things. And, hey, I believe that God can intervene on any chart and totally circumvent it from the ground up. I haven't.
Yeah, and the other thing is that we are very much able to influence our lifespan, and we know that just simplistically in, for example, if I choose to run across the interstate frequently, then I'm probably not going to last very long. If I choose to eat McDonald's twice a day for the rest of the time, I'm probably not going to last very long. So we know that our personal choices have a big impact over health and therefore lifespan. And we know as well that the extent to which we're intellectually engaged in life, using the brain, learning, expressing an interest in the world around us, that's something that is very beneficial for the maintenance of life as well. And then, avoiding stress, avoiding discord. I think, though, that Stephen, when I look at his charts, I think to myself, well, he has an extremely weak sun, and the sun is the heart. It's also the vital force. So that's the first thing that sticks out for me. And then I say to myself, well, the other end of the battery that maintains us in life is the moon. His moon is extremely powerful, and it's harmonious, if I remember correctly. But his moon is in the bends of the nodes. So he's got one luminary that's extremely weak, his weakest planet, and then he's got another luminary that's powerful, but that lies in the bends of the nodes. So those two factors don't bode well, in my opinion. But then also you have to say, well, the sun in his chart, his vital force and heart, opposes the ascendant that rules the physical body. He has the south node of the moon in the first house of the physical body, and the ruler of his ascendant, Uranus, opposes his ascendant as well and is conjunct the north node. So that could be triggered at some point. And given that he's got a challenging first house, I would say that he is somebody that really does have to be very proactive in terms of just taking good care of himself in life.
Yeah, I'd say he has a challenged first house. Can you imagine the pressure of being the first African American president?
Yeah, I tell you though, I always have felt with Obama that he will be far more respected and far more recognized and rewarded for all of the good things he does in the world after his presidency, far more than any recognition or prestige he gets from his presidency. And he's a young man. I mean, it's incredible, really, isn't it, that he was born in 1961 and he's about to end his second term as President of the United States.
Yes.
I'm sure he'll do wonderful, wonderful things in the world. I think that for him, the presidency is, strangely enough, it's not the ultimate role. It's almost the midpoint or even the beginning somehow.
You're exactly right. Well, let me just say this. One of the things we talked about before you arrived was the fact that the president's chart is preventional. Now, this means that when the president was born, it was during a waning moon. He was born after a full moon. And interestingly enough, we find that people, the majority of people with these sorts of charts tend to be late bloomers.
Yes, yeah.
You see. And
Good
so,
point.
wow, he is young. And looking at his solar return, I find that it's overwhelmingly configured towards setting up his financial success in his post-presidential career.
Mm-hmm.
He's all about the finances right now. He's all about the organizations right now. He's all about the publicity right now. Based upon the solar return, these elements are isolated also. And so he's wanting to sort of, he's setting up his financial profits later. He's setting those up now based upon his solar return. So it's going to be interesting to watch his behavior this year and to speculate about how that translates. Now, as far as his legal concerns, I expect those to come to a head probably around January, February, perhaps, of 2015. And that's what I'm thinking these items might. I think and I do agree with you. I feel as if he's going to be ultimately vindicated from whatever charges Congress thinks that they're going to charge him with or sue him for. I don't see it as really hurting the president either.
It's a song and a dance. I don't think it will damage him.
No. Interestingly enough, the way that I see the challenges to the first house also is, the simple social pressures of being a minority in the political field. You see, can you imagine the amount of snobbery? Now, this is best symbolized by Saturn in Capricorn. This is what he's, you know what I mean? Capricorn is that sort of haute couture snobbery, the sort of Cape Cod, upper class status. So there's a sense that, President Obama is sort of out of his element socially. Do you see? And this all definitely impact. Now, these are sort of inflammatory statements, but I must point out that according to principles laid out long time ago in Firmicus Maternus and Ptolemy, there are ways to look at a person's chart and determine what level of what social level they arise out of. Do you know what I mean? If we're a head of state, let's just put it like this. Ptolemy had what he called the rank of fame, and at the very top of the rank of fame was essentially the God man. And beneath that you had the chieftain, the boss, the king. And most United States presidents as of late, their charts are not kingly charts. They're not even corporate executive charts. they fall at a class below that, and this president's chart is like that as well. And one of the key ways to know this is looking at the luminaries. Both of them are below the horizon. This is a big strike against a high sort of blue blood type of status. But we're just talking about the social status represented by Capricorn. Not the sort of nouveau riche upward mobility that's been empowered in the modern era. President Obama has benefited and used that quite well and to quite good advantage. However, there are elements in Washington, obviously, who have not, and probably who never will. And I wonder, how the president interacts with those forces. And, I wonder, obviously, if there would be a disconnect between how he would respond to my question and the truth of the matter. What can I say?
When we were talking about the future and lifespan of President Obama, I intuitively felt very drawn to 2022, and I'm not saying that would be a year that he would pass to Spirit, but I do feel that that's a very significant and quite dramatic year for him. And then, Stephen, when I progressed his chart out to that time, I could see that Uranus, actually at the beginning of August 2022, transiting Uranus and Mars and the north node of the moon will square his ascendant. And at that same time, the nodes of the moon, the transiting nodes of the moon, will place his ascendant in the bends, and also loosely place his natal sun in the bends, and transiting Saturn will be on his ascendant. So it'll be interesting to see what 2022 brings for Obama, because I see that as a very transformational year. And you see, transiting Pluto that year will be conjunct his progressed Jupiter and his Saturn in the 12th house. So if I were him and I were using metaphysics to manage my life, in effect, as we do, saying, well, I'd like as much information as possible so that I'm informed and I can make good choices, I'd certainly be looking at 2022 very carefully, and I'd be making very careful choices in the early 2020s, because he could have, I feel he could have significant problems in 2022. What do the third area say about 2022 for him? We know that this is a very tense, very pivotal time in the world generally. And interestingly, his chart looks very complex at that time. Now, who knows what role he'll be playing then, but I would have a very keen eye on this chart at that point in time if it were mine.
Well, Venus and Mars are the pertinent time lords during that span, around that time. And, the president will be having a second house year. Now, if we derive the chart, if we derive houses, if we turn the chart, then the second house refers to, issues of illness or whatever regarding the partners of the president. Do you see? And in that case, I would want to look at the Arabic part of marriage. So I'm curious in that transit chart if the degree of 29 Gemini is stressed by a hard aspect from either of the malefics or even...
Let's see. 29 Gemini. Let's see. There's an aspect from Neptune. There's a square from Neptune. There's a loose square from Neptune at that time.
Well, that would certainly, I would worry in that case about, because these Arabic parts are very important, and
So obviously I would worry about the medication taken by the First Lady during that time, for example.
Yeah, do you know what's interesting, though? Because you say medication, it's really interesting because I felt very drawn to Neptune when I was looking at this chart initially.
Well, it could be a Neptunian malady. Do you see? And these numbers, so many, that we could talk about listing. So planets and signs, etc., can be assigned various illnesses and regions of the body, etc. So Neptune might refer to some glandular function, something endocrine. You know what I mean? Jelly bean?
Mm-hmm.
Might refer to something along those lines. Of course, I don't want to, speculate too much right now. Firmicus Maternus also said that only he who is divinely blessed by God can go very far in terms of particulars. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel comfortable saying that, hey, we got that square between Neptune and the part of marriage. So as far as I'm concerned, that represents a sort of Neptunian conflict with the president's, wife. It could mean maybe it's a rough holiday season, and she drinks a little bit too much one day or something. So it could be something completely innocuous. I don't want to scare people. House page year, to house 2 like that. Let's just hope, for example, that it refers to monetary anxiety. Let's just hope as far as those. Now, in the solar return for that year, that week, Jupiter by whole sign, because Pisces is a whole sign house on the second cusp. The Alcibiades second cusp looks like it would be an Aries, right, Steve?
Yes.
Look at that. Now, according to my calculation, the second house cusp is probably the sign of Mars, the shadow point of Mars. Could that refer to perhaps some Mars and Aries sort of spending, military expenditures as president, perhaps? I mean, who knows? These would certainly be secret as implied by the nature of the Antision, by definition. So that's pretty interesting. His financial, of course, by this time, 2022, he'll be out of office already, and enjoying his life out of office. Like you, I do expect this post-presidential career to be great. His midheaven in Sagittarius, directing that by triplicity. We have Jupiter ruling the first third of his life in terms of career. No problems there. That's pretty obvious. Jupiter is a professor and a lawyer. Sure. The Sun is going to get the second third of his career. Sun in Leo, that's the president. Sure, fine. Well, Saturn gets the third. And this is going to be the most interesting part, if you ask me.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you.
Because when Saturn is the time lord, when Saturn is a ruler of time, he has the power to act. So he'll have the power to joy in his 12th house. Because let's face it, the 12th house is the house of Saturn's joy. Saturn likes secrets. Saturn likes confinement.
Yeah, and Obama has a pretty good Saturn as Saturn goes.
Sure, absolutely.
In its own sign as well as in the 12th house. And it's relatively powerful, but it's only mildly discordant. I find it quite rare to stumble across a chart that has a harmonious Saturn, actually.
This Saturn, if it was not for the placement in the 12th house, this Saturn would functionally be an accidental benefic, meaning that I would not count it as, in other words, if it aspected the moon by square, I wouldn't count it with the same severity if it were in its normal malefic status. Let's put it like this.
It's conjunct Jupiter as well, actually. So you've got the two business planets, Saturn and Jupiter.
Right.
His Saturn's a pretty decent Saturn, and his best planet by far is Jupiter, and it's a damn good planet to have on your side, and it's conjunct his Saturn in the 12th. I think he'll be unusually fortunate in business and in the roles that he has in the world, and hopefully he'll be able to actually enjoy some of these opportunities without all of the roadblocks that one inevitably gets as president under the spotlight.
I was actually speaking exactly on those lines, I was thinking along those exact lines earlier, because I noticed that a lot of the ancient literature I come across, they invariably praise the benefic effects of Jupiter in the first house.
it has an incredible power to reverse all sorts of harm. So it's just flat out good luck one way or the other. To have Jupiter rising in the first house, it's very fortunate, very good. I mean, it's something to envy.
And again, if you were his astrological advisor and he sat down and said, "Oh, Stephen, I can't believe this. There's now a vote to sue me, for goodness sake. How do you think this is going to play out?" You'd say, "Look, you've got an incredible Jupiter on your side, and it's quite a mysterious, spiritual Jupiter.
Right.
The hand of God will just sort of wave, and this will just disappear. Don't even worry about this." That's what I feel we would say to him in terms of this litigation, this lawsuit.
As far as this specific litigation, I would definitely... Well, I mean, I'm not too worried about this for the president either. I think that there will be some worry about it, but in the end, I think the president will be vindicated. Yeah, I don't think this will be the last time that the president gets summoned before the bar, because in his third of life, Saturn also is the triplicity ruler of the 7th house of litigations, and Saturn's going to have power to act during that time. And litigation is the sort of thing Saturn will want to do. Now, being placed in his sign, that might hedge that bet somewhat. I'm inclined to see Jupiter as an intermittent sort of help, maybe, because I look at Saturn as ruling over Jupiter, because Jupiter is in Saturn's sign. So Saturn rather, is going to cause Jupiter to exist. It's the action of Saturn that brings Jupiter to life. It was Saturn in Capricorn that caused the legal success of Obama's career, represented by Jupiter in Aquarius, represented Obama's professorship of law, as shown by Jupiter in Aquarius. And this Jupiter in Aquarius, in turn, is going to turn right around and create and cause the Saturn in Capricorn. So they have this circular relationship between them that I think might actually engender some more litigations. But I think Saturn might cause... I don't think it'll be any... I don't know. It's too early for me to say, actually, about long-term.
Well, I'll tell you what I feel.
What's that?
I feel that he will be very successful in his career. Obviously, he's a smart man. I admire him for being president of the United States, and I'm sure he'll do wonderful things in the future. My concern for him is less to do with this lawsuit, well, not at all really about this lawsuit, because as I said, I feel that he'll be fine with that. And if you look at the statistics, he hasn't issued many executive orders in comparison with other presidents. I mean, very, very low statistics compared to Bush and I think Reagan. So that's sort of odd. My fear for him is that as time goes on, as we get towards the later part of this decade and then start getting our teeth into the 2020s, I think he'll receive a lot of criticism for his foreign policy choices as President of the United States, because I think that's the problematic, the truly problematic area, and he will be. I feel he'll be used as a scapegoat, and there'll be a lot of reflection upon Obama's foreign policy choices when he was president.
Yes, I think I'm inclined to agree for sure. I mean, I don't think anybody would. I think the public opinion is against the president in terms of the scorecard isn't very good on diplomat.
No, and again, this is not directly a criticism of Obama, because it is so difficult to make things happen in that role, and I feel for him. I do. But then I look at the map, and you try and find a spot in the Middle East that isn't burning right now.
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge problem that is not going to go away, and there will be a lot of debate about previous foreign policy decisions.
Well, I think I have to say that I really think that once the president gets out of office, and I could be wrong, but I'm thinking that once he gets out, he's going to venture into something else. I think he's going to bask in the glory of his, being cracking so many, cresting so many summits, being the first this, the first that, having a glorious career, and I think he's going to become the merchant that his chart says that he essentially is. He's going to gravitate to that, and I really don't think that in terms of, like, if I were looking at this as a political scientist, I'm not sure that I would say that the president left much of a footprint in terms of American politics or diplomacy, one way or the other.
I think that he could play a very important role in the world as a negotiator, as a mediator,
sure,
communicator. Yeah. I think that. Let's see. Maybe he, in some capacity, is able to address some of these huge problems we have in the Middle East. But I don't see how he's going to be able to do much about that in the final stretch of his presidency. Because I don't think we've got a lot of clout in the Middle East anymore.
Well, if, and this is a big if at this point, I'm not willing to commit myself to that statement quite yet, but just enjoying the simple pleasure of imagining and daydreaming. If Venus should, as universal significator of Islam, should retain that sort of signification, then when she becomes the main Firdausia period ruler, then perhaps that could represent some sort of Jimmy Carter-like, ambassadorship, to the Muslim world. It's no secret that the president has sympathy for Muslims, and and
I tell you, he's got, Stephen, two beautiful progressions, two beautiful major progressed aspects. These deep underlying pockets of energy. He's got two that seem to peak in September, October of 2016.
Right.
And one involves Mercury and Venus. Venus, as you said, rules Islam.
Right.
And the other one is Venus and Pluto. Venus is Islam, amongst other things, as you said, and Pluto's transformation. I wonder whether he'll be able to achieve more on this subject after his presidency. I wouldn't be surprised if the poor guy says, when he walks out of the White House, if he says to his family, well, fantastic, now we can have a vacation and then get things done.
Right.
Because there are so many roadblocks. But I do think that he could play a wonderful role here in dealing with some of these huge challenges with the Middle East.
Well, one way or the other, time will tell, and we will certainly find out. We're coming down toward the end of our show here. We got about a minute and a half left. Steve, we're glad you could join us, man. It's totally my fault. I thought.
Oh no, don't worry. I'm quite relaxed about things. I get an extra hour off today. It's fine.
I'm so glad you showed up. When you didn't show up, I worried. I'm like, oh my God. Steve decided it was too heavy to talk about the president. I'm like, oh shit.
No, Steve was doing yoga.
I'm like, I'm going to Gitmo. I'm so going to Gitmo after this. Well, just to remind everyone, you can find Stephen Frampton at stephenframpton.com. grab a copy of his book, Thinking Completely Outside the Box, which is a fascinating expose astrologically of the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting. And you can find me at thegingerpsychic.com. You can email me at steven@thegingerpsychic.com or grab Steve at inquiries@stephenframpton.com. INQUIRIES@stephenframpton.com. You want to add anything, Steve?
No, I just encourage people to check out your site, Stephen, and to take advantage of your incredible expertise and insight, and to follow your blogs, etc., and hope that people join us again next week.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you guys for listening, and have a great week. We'll see you in 7 days. Bye-bye.